Thank you, everybody, for joining. It looks like we have quite a good group of folks in the room. I'll introduce myself. My name is Justin Tyrell. I'm the executive director of the Minnesota Justice Research Center. I'm really excited for this conversation. I see Rena talking, Jackie. I don't know.
She is talking, so I don't think she realizes we can't hear her, but I'm messaging her on the side.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is a really important conversation, so we don't want to lose time on this, but just so folks know, full disclosure, my connection to the issue of voting rights in Minnesota started as an organizer. I worked on the campaign in 2013, 2014, to re-enfranchise Minnesotans who are on probation. The idea is that once you are out of prison in Minnesota and you're living in community, you're paying taxes, you should have the right to vote. And so the idea is that if you have your kids, like I do, have going to school, we should be able to vote for school board, for example. There's close to 60,000 Minnesotans in the state of Minnesota that do not currently have the right to vote. And we've tried to work on multiple different strategies to advance a bill at the state capitol in order to be able to give people the right to vote back. Representative Moran, who we're having some technical difficulties with right now, is the chief author of that bill at the state. But we're also joined today by Craig Coleman, who is leading a lawsuit for the ACLU on this topic. We're joined by Anika Bowie, who has led the coalition to restore the vote in Minnesota. And we're joined by a good friend of mine, someone I'm really excited for us to hear from, Desmond Meade, who led the fight in Florida to mobilize, I don't know how many people, at least over 1 million. I'll let you get your numbers right, brother. And move the state of Florida to not only stop canceling people's voting rights for life, but to also, when they put additional barriers in, Desmond just went to work and took on those barriers as well and helped tens of thousands of people be able to vote this year for the first time. So I will pause here. Rena, do we have you back? Can we hear you? Representative Moran? I see her mute. It just went on. Representative Moran, can you hear us? Okay, I'm going to continue the conversation. I'll be honest, I don't have the same notes in front of me. I don't have the same notes in front of me that I sent to Rena, but to Representative Moran. But what I'll do is I'll start with introductions. If the panelists would just take 5 minutes to introduce themselves. I'll start with Craig. If you could talk about your role at the ACLU and the work that you're doing on this issue. Just take a couple minutes to do that. We'll come back around and dig deeper into the specific work that everyone is doing, but just do a brief introduction of who you are, your organization, and how you're connected to this issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'm Craig Coleman. I'm a partner at the Faegre director law firm, and we are partnering with the ACLU, both national ACLU and Minnesota ACLU, on litigation in Minnesota, challenging the constitutionality of Minnesota's felony disenfranchisement scheme. And specifically, our claims are that the disenfranchisement of individuals who live in the community on probation, parole, or supervised release violate the equal protection guarantee of the Minnesota Constitution, the substantive due process, and Article 7 itself, which is where Minnesota voting rights are guaranteed. And so the outgrowth of this lawsuit, really, got a long history that I think is born of the frustration of legislative inaction on this issue. And we'll go into a little bit more of the history of Minnesota's felony disenfranchisement scheme. But there's been a long-standing recognition that it's not justified, that it's fundamentally unjust, And for 15, 20 years now, there have been efforts to fix it at the legislature, and that hasn't happened. And so this is really an instance, as far as we're concerned, where the courts need to step in and fix the problem, particularly when it's clear that there's racial underpinnings, racial injustices to the system. And in that scenario, it's not okay for the legislature simply to stand silent and maintain the status quo without ever having justified the disenfranchisement of people in the community. So just very briefly, we're currently in the Court of Appeals. We actually just filed our brief on Monday. That'll get briefed throughout the rest of the year. We'll have oral argument early next year and go forward from there. So we'll discuss this as we go forward, but I'll turn it over to Desmond to just kind of give a brief overview of your work organizing the way this should be done, with having the people decide and re-enfranchise folks through the democratic process.
Thank you, Craig. So my name is Desmond Meade. I am the Executive Director of Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. Our organization is one that is made up of people with previous felony convictions, as well as folks who have loved ones who've been impacted by our criminal, some way say, injustice system. When Florida Rights Restoration Coalition was formed, its primary focus was on ending the lifetime disenfranchisement of people in the state of Florida. We have expanded to address more than just that. We are.
Justin?
Yeah. So we've expanded to address more than just felon disenfranchisement. We're also looking at criminal justice reform, as well as with a hyper focus on reentry. And so our organization, I think, is best known for the work that we did in 2018 in passing Amendment 4, which re-enfranchised 1.4 million Floridians with a previous felony conviction, and our subsequent work to combat our Florida legislature's attempt to create financial obstacles to being able to vote by addressing the fines and fees issue and raising, I think this past election cycle, we raised over $27 million to help over 40,000 individuals pay off their fines and fees. And we were able to successfully register over 87,000 returning citizens since the passage of Amendment 4. And so I am excited to be on this panel and to talk about the work that we've done and how it's played a role in inspiring work across the country, and how important it is for directly impacted people to be at the center of a lot of these discussions and strategies as it relates to expanding the franchise. So I guess I will pass it on to Anika.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anika Bowie. I am the founder and director of Run Like Harriet, which is a freedom-fighting organization centered in Black organizing for Black liberation. And I'm also the vice president of the Minneapolis NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which is one of the most longest civil rights organization that exists. It's definitely an honor to walk in the footsteps of I.W. Wells, W.E.B. Du Bois, and so many amazing folks who have, done some great civil rights organizing here in Minnesota. Also, I'm an activist, and as Justin Tyrell had shared, led the Restore the Vote, Minnesota Restore the Vote Coalition, which is made up of over 80 to 90 members. I first got involved critically with Restore the Vote about 3 years ago, right? And that was a time where this bill went through a lot in the state, in the state House and the Senate. And, you know, when I first got into the organizing, I also had a very clear focus on learning the history of this bill and how has the suffrage movement, right, voter rights movement really played out in the state capitol, and understanding that Minnesota, you know, has nationally is known for the progressive politics, right? The progressive policy change, progressive being the first legislators to really move on bills before it's passed on a federal level. And even in that history, understanding that we have a strong tension when it comes to racial justice as well, and racial equity, and making sure we really have a strong enough coalition. So one of my goals was to ensure that people who were actually impacted were at the table. There wasn't an inclusion of people who were impacted at the decision-making table, or even when we were creating strategy. So that was one of my accomplishments when I joined the coalition and was really looking around the table and seeing that, yes, we have a lot of thought leaders, we have a lot of lawyers, we have a lot of lobbyists, and even the legislators that was there too, but we were kind of in an echo chamber. So I wanted to bring in new blood in the sense of folks who's actually closest to the problem should also be closest to the change, right? And it did, you know, clearly, you know, in Minnesota, we have not been successful with passing it in both the House and the Senate and getting it to the governor to sign. I think there's a strong need for more relationships around what Restore the Vote actually means and who it actually benefits. There is a strong need to really do more research around it. So the conversation isn't hijacked, you know, around using nuanced type of language around who should be re-enfranchised. But I'm super excited to get, you know, go deeper into this conversation with Restore the Vote. It's been an amazing opportunity to see how other states are doing it, and can't wait to get victory here in Minnesota.
Yo, thank you, Anika. I really appreciate all of you sharing what you can. I want to just check back with Representative Moran for a moment. Representative Moran, is your audio working?
Let's hope so. Can you hear me?
Yes. All right.
Right. You know, some days you get up, you're feeling good, you're ready to go. You log in early, you did the sound check, the video, and at the last moment, what happens? The unknown, right? And so that's called life. It happens, but I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to be here. So if you want me to, I can try to fulfill my obligation here as the moderator, or what would you like to happen?
I think you should start with a brief introduction of yourself, and then hop into the next round of questions. And I'm here to assist you however I can. Right?
Okay. Have all these panelists spoken?
Yes, ma'am.
Introduce themselves? Okay. So let me do a quick introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rena Moran. I am the current state representative here in St. Paul, Minnesota, representing District 65A. I am going into my 6th term. I have been the chair of Health and Human Service Policy Committee. I'm also currently the chair of the Select Committee on Racial Justice. I also chair what we call here our People of Color Indigenous Caucus, that we call our Posse Caucus. And I'm also chairing our United Black Legislative Caucus, which we have currently now have 6 Black legislators in the Minnesota House of Representatives, which is a body of 134, the most in the history of Minnesota politics, along with 16 legislators of color. Let's see, I am excited to be here because restoring the votes of ex-felons is important to me. It's a bill that I introduced back in 2013-14 legislative session, but I also just recently reintroduced the Restore the Vote bill during the 2019-2020 legislative session as the body was going through a reaction of the murder of George Floyd, where we as a people of color Indigenous caucus led on numerous bills around police accountability. So I was one of the lead negotiators within that process. Here in the state of Minnesota, we are the only divided legislature in the country, the only. We have a Democratic House and a Republican Senate. And with that, that means that we are always at the table negotiating around the issues that we care about. And so that is what happened along with the police accountability negotiations, is that we had to negotiate. But I can sit here and say the work that we did around there, with especially with the language around the use of force, would definitely make the lives of Minnesotans better. And so with that, a piece about me, and let me not go far from saying I do this work because I am a mother. I'm a mother of 4 Black sons. I am a mother of 3 daughters. I have 7 children, and I have 8 grandkids. And so I do this work because I know that we have laws and policies that are not fair and just, that have not been just. So my work is done through a race equity lens, always done through that race equity lens. And it is done so that I continue to fight for social, racial, economic, and environmental justice. And so with that, I will stop, and I'm excited to begin these questions, these rounds of questions with the panelists, because they're doing some awesome work. And I think we will all benefit from hearing from each one of them in the work that they're doing. So with that, why don't I start off with trying to set some contents around the work around RTV and the work that Craig has been doing with the ACLU and their lawsuits. So Craig, can you please share about the ACLU lawsuit and provide some context to the issue?
Yeah, so just briefly, the felony disenfranchisement in Minnesota dates to the framing and ratification of the Constitution in 1858. So in Article 7, there's a broad grant. Well, it wasn't broad at the time. It was white male suffrage when it was ratified. But it extended the right to vote, but then included an exception for felony disenfranchisement. There's really no indication of what the framers were thinking of at the time. They didn't explain any rationale for it. Subsequently, post-Reconstruction, felony disenfranchisement was clearly used as part of the white supremacist toolkit to suppress Black voting rights. There's not a real clear indication that that was motivating. It's just sort of unexplained that it's in the Constitution. So the current scheme, so then the question is, in the Constitution, the framers specifically rejected, one thing we do have notes in the history is that they considered the possibility of permanent disenfranchisement and rejected that. And our Constitution includes a clause that says folks who are convicted of a felony are disenfranchised unless restored to civil rights. And so the question is, what does that mean? At the time, obviously, there was no community, such a thing as community supervision, parole and probation, supervised release. These are all, things that are developed to get layered on top of our constitutional system since ratification. And so I think nobody really believes that the Constitution disenfranchises or requires the disenfranchisement of persons living in the community. And so that's really a legislative scheme. And so in 1962, the legislature, perhaps out of sort of a progressive desire to restore civil rights, said that civil rights are automatically restored at the discharge of sentence. So when people come off a paper, they're automatically restored. And yet the legislature never explained why voting rights shouldn't be restored automatically when people are, free from incarceration. And so our lawsuit basically says that if you're free to move about the community, free to consume news, free to go to your polling place, you have been restored to civil rights under the meaning of the Constitution. And on top of that, because the legislature has never articulated any justification for disenfranchising people in the community, it can't be sustained constitutionally. And for any lawyers that are out there that want to ask questions about, how constitutional review and kind of the particulars of that, we can get into it. But that's kind of the broad overview of the lawsuit.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I think it's really important that we know that, restricting the rights of felons to vote was embedded in when the slaves were freed also. And as a way to get them back into servitude, when they was freed and didn't have housing or was not able to feed themselves and their family, they would go out and do what they do for their family. You take a chicken, right? Steal a chicken, and they made that an automatic felon just for stealing a chicken and putting back into servitude. And so it is this constant, way of, preventing, everyone's voices from being heard. And this is definitely one of those ways. So Desmond, so tell us about the fight in Florida and how things turned out in this election.
Rep, I'm glad you asked me that, because you see, I started moving around, right? Hearing you and Craig speak, and so, man, I am like ecstatic about the fight in Florida, because we're doing so much more than just restoring voting rights. We're shifting a narrative. We're creating an environment that should be emulated throughout this country, right? Because listen, when we won Amendment 4, we brought together people from all walks of life, all political persuasions, right? We dealt with the most controversial topic in the most controversial state during a controversial and volatile political climate, and we won, right, with over 5.1 million votes with no major opposition. And we had over 1 million people who voted for Amendment 4, also voted for our current governor, which showed a broad cross-section of support. And I tell people that those 5.1 million votes that passed Amendment 4, those votes was not based on hate or fear, but rather votes that was based on love, forgiveness, and redemption. And we showed the world and the country that love can, in fact, win the day, that we don't have to advance these human rights issues. We don't have to advance major policy issues by tearing each other down or attacking each other, but rather by bringing people together, right? And some of that starts with that narrative that you all kind of riled me up with, because here's the deal. We don't even call a person a felon. And I'm going to tell you why, right? For a couple of reasons, right? Studies have shown that when you call someone that you actually increase the likelihood of them recidivating. Because we've heard you call a child stupid, they're going to grow up thinking they're what, right? But guess what? That person with a felony conviction is someone's son, daughter, father, mother, uncle, right? And we know that when we use those words, we're doing two things at the same time. We are dehumanizing that individual, right? With the previous felony conviction, while at the same time desensitizing people, right, as to their issues and the plight that they're facing, right? And so we've used the words returning citizens because, that's the closest thing that we can find to talk about what we're no different than any other citizens. We've all made mistakes. Some just got caught, right? But at the end of the day, because we are American citizens, right, and the most endearing quality of citizenship is being able to vote, right, that we should have that right, that right that was given to us just for the sake of our humanity and because we are citizens of this country. And we shifted this narrative to where we were able to get people to understand that there is no me without you, and that supporting our issues as it relates to reenfranchisement and the empowerment of people with previous felony convictions is a win-win-win situation for everyone, right? That nobody loses here, right? But we have everything to gain, right? And we show that even with, in spite of the fact that our legislature wanted to impose the fines and fees as a barrier to being able to vote, what do? We went out and we organized the entire country, raised over $27 million in 2 months, right? And paid off fines and fees for people to not only create a more inclusive democracy, but allow people whose driver's license was suspended to be able to regain their driver's license, to get better jobs, to take care of their families. But we also, ready for this, Rep? You're gonna love this because you're a state rep. We infused over $27 million into Florida's economy, save jobs, save taxpayers' dollars, and contribute the victim compensation fund in teen court. So what is that narrative? That narrative is when you're advocating for returning citizens, not only are we creating a more inclusive democracy, but we as an organization of people with previous felony convictions have clearly demonstrated that people with felony convictions have a lot to offer a state, have a lot to offer on the economy, because guess what? No other organization has infused the type of resources into Florida's economy, especially during this pandemic, than an organization that's led by the very same people that you used to vilify, right? And so there are creative ways that we can approach this, but it starts with a narrative and a mindset that, wait a minute, these are human beings. We got to remember, and I end with this, that a lot of people don't understand this, that before the United States was able to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? They had to first engage in a massive propaganda campaign that dehumanized the Japanese people and desensitized American citizens toward them. So when they dropped the bomb and obliterated an entire city of innocent women and children, that it wasn't a horrific moral outrage, but rather a celebration. You know what I'm saying? And so that's the same thing that we're facing even around criminal justice reform, around voting rights. It's the same thing that we're facing. And we know that we have to deconstruct these false narratives and project the humanity of people who have been impacted and marginalized, and understand that our humanity is so intertwined and there's so many things that bind us together as a community. And as a matter of fact, it's much more than what separates us. And if we focus on that, we can make magic happen, and we can indeed create a better country, a better society, a better world.
Wow, Desmond. Powerful. Powerful, powerful, powerful. Congratulations on the work that you and others have done in Florida. Give me some hope, because, you know, if Florida can do this, Florida, surely we can do that here in Minnesota. But what I heard you say is that you organize people power. The people power force folks like in my business who don't always see the world the way you're seeing it, to do the right thing. So, you know, just thank you for your work and your words and your inspiration. And, you know, at the end of the day, love will prevail if you do our work in the name of love. So thank you. And thank you for reminding us that of the words that we repeat, and that we repeat and call others. So, okay, that was just awesome. To my young, powerful woman in front of me, Anika Bowie, and the work that you're doing here in Minnesota. Can you tell us how does the fight for voting rights look here in Minnesota?
So thank you, Representative Rena Moran. So the fight really looks like from a personal narrative, right, building. I know the reason why I came into this fight wasn't because of the politics or even a love of policy change, but it was a love of making sure that people who I know that had a lived experience with mass incarceration, a lived experience of being criminalized in these communities, not only in our urban cities, but also in rural areas as well, who have been just locked out of the economic opportunity to take care of their families and just totally disconnected, right, from the process, to make sure that they have the opportunity to go to the ballot. I know my first time really graduating was in my first job, actually was working part of a campaign. And I really had an amazing opportunity to really go door to door and talk with people and convince them to vote, not for just a candidate, but for just the fact that we have this right and we could utilize our voice and our power. And what I was faced with was a lot of areas, really communities of color, primarily in Black communities who have been historically disenfranchised, that they were told and they believed that their vote didn't matter. And as I was digging through those conversations of asking, why would someone just give up, their right to vote, to find out that they didn't have a right to vote. They weren't eligible. They never was actually even included. So the things that we're dealing with here in Minnesota is figuring out what is that greatest equalizer to get us to the ballot. Because one of the challenges that we have, a good challenge that we have actually, is that Minnesota ranks the #1 state that has the highest voter turnout, right? So there's kind of this challenge of like, we don't have a voting problem because we're the top, of the ballot when it comes to vote. We come out and vote all the time, right? We're able to sustain our political voice. So it's getting those folks to actually look underneath, the great Minnesota progressiveness and realize that there's people who's missing out, right? There's people who could participate in that. Also, with participating will make our state a lot safer. I know with Restore the Vote, it's really tied into criminal justice reform, right? And like Desmond was sharing, one of our goals was broadening this conversation, because people hear criminal justice reform and automatically feel like, well, we're not giving any justice to criminals, right? These are murderers, these are rapists, these are like horrible people. Why are we even giving any empathy to this population? So part of the work is humanizing those stories. When I was at the Capitol and people are testifying, we always make sure that people center it in their families. I got into this work because the year before I joined the coalition, I was able to help my dad get early termination on his probation. My dad was 50 years old when he was able to vote for the very first time. He is a third generation Minnesotan. He was born and raised here in Minnesota and had generations here, and he wasn't able to vote until 50 years old. And that was because of the real work of realizing that, hey, you need to be part of our democracy, right? And my dad represents thousands and thousands of people who never really talked about voting. I didn't grow up in a household that had a voting story of, hey, we're going to go to the polls. And I didn't realize that until after I started acting out my civic duty and realizing that these conversations need to happen in our families, right? And when we're having conversations with our students and with our children about their schooling or about their future and their opportunity. And we need to be teaching civic engagements and the power of the vote, because that gives them the power to actually see change and actually understand who our political leaders are and how they can create a better life for us, right? And also, another thing that we addressed was recidivism. Like this conversation, like I said, is tied to folks who have been convicted. And we've looked at ways to decrease probation. We were able to get the 5-year probation cap passed in the state of Minnesota So where people aren't on extensive long probations anymore. I met a woman, and I think, you know, with having a racial equity lens, this was a white woman who was on probation for over 40 years. She probably will never, ever be able to vote because she was in her 60s and had talked about her experience of going to prison because she had killed her rapist. And during that time, you know, the law was not in favor of her, and she will not be able to really even advocate herself through the ballot. So it's really taking the time to a population that has been politically disenfranchised, but with also empowering them with what they do have, and that is their actual vote, that is their access and agency inside of the Capitol, that's having these conversations with our senators and our state representatives, that's writing down their story and publishing it as op-eds, that's door knocking. And if they're told that they can't vote, these folks in Minnesota who cannot vote are getting tens and hundreds of other people to vote. We have been using strategy with getting folks who, you know, charging elected officials, right, to really energize this conversation and put it a part of their agenda. So when they are running for office, the folks who are disenfranchised are able to feel empowered and be empowered by activating and getting thousands of other people to vote, right? So there's a lot of ways that we can work this until we get to that promised land, right, to actually have a full universal suffrage of those who have been disconnected for so long.
That is awesome, Anika. It's just awesome. It's a lot of work. It's a commitment, you know, to help others to see the value that they bring, you know, for themselves, for their community, for their family. And that's the work that you have been doing and doing so well. You know, getting that probation cap, because Minnesota is known for not often sending people to prison, but for long probationary periods, right? So having that cap really allows folks to be able to participate in a way they know that they would not have been had you not done that work, and so many others done that work around the probation cap. So thank you so much for that work and the work that you're doing. Okay, we're gonna move it on. You know, I'm a timekeeper too. I learned as chair, you know, we have to keep looking at the time because the conversation we have can go on forever, but the information that you need to share is so important. So I'm going to go on to the second round of questions. And this is for anyone can respond to this. Considering the current state of the national election and a few close local election, how do you see RTV impacting elections if it is passed? So considering the current state of the national elections and a few close local elections, we keep our eyes on Georgia. They need some help. We need to get those 2 seats. That's my piece. How do you see the RTV impacting elections if it is passed? And anyone can speak on that.
I guess I could.
Well, I will jump in. Oh, sorry. So I mean, just briefly, in Minnesota, I think it's clearly a mistake to look at this as a partisan issue in terms of its impact on partisan politics. And just in terms of the numbers, there clearly is a disproportionate impact on persons of color. So we're currently disenfranchising 4 to 5% of otherwise eligible African-American Minnesotans. It's worse for American Indian Minnesotans. We're disenfranchising about 8% of American Indian Minnesotans. And I suppose at a local level, you'd have to say it has some impact, because there are counties in western Minnesota where something like 12% of the voting age population is disenfranchised, including huge numbers of American Indians. So you can look at it that way. What I will say is, just in terms of raw numbers, there are more people that are subject to felony disenfranchisement while living in the community in outstate Minnesota than there are in the urban metro. And to the extent that our politics now is so divided between urban and rural, I don't think there's a clear I don't think you can draw, clear inferences about exactly, what would occur. What I would push back on is any sort of assumption or argument that this is just about trying to build the Democratic base, for example, or you get kind of accusations that where you're kind of associating felons. And I agree with Desmond. That's a kind of a problematic pejorative term, but association of that with A, people of color, and B, Democrats, and that is what this is about. And that's not true at all. I mean, this is about just fundamental justice. It's about dehumanizing people who are living in the community. This is about basic kind of moral and political propositions and commitment to democracy, rather than partisan politics, as far as I'm concerned.
Could I follow up, Craig?
Yes, Desmond.
Because I think we have an opportunity to expand this, right? And it's not about how the passage of the legislation would impact elections, right? That's being too narrow, man. It's about how it's going to impact people's lives, right? Anika just got through talking about her dad, right? And I was moved by that because I'm thinking about the thousands upon thousands of returning citizens. We met a lady, 84 years old, voting for the first time, right? People in their 70s and their 60s, and you seen the gleam in their eyes, and what we realized was the work that we were doing was more than just impacting elections. It was impacting people and their communities and reinstilling hope, right, in folks. And that is so much more valuable, right, than the outcome of an election. And it got to a point where even before the first vote was counted in this presidential election, I told my staff and our leaders that we won. We won because we was able to impact countless people's lives. We had this young lady, Moran, in Southeast Florida, and we was out there canvassing, and we ran across her. We was going to register to vote, and as we was registering to vote, she started crying because the doctor, prior to us coming there, had given her 6 months to live.
Wow.
Right, and she was crying because, and she told our canvassers, which was crying right along with her, that she never thought that she'll be able to vote, right? And she's been trying for over 24 years, but because of a felony conviction or a drug addiction, that she felt she'd never get this opportunity. And there she was, filling out a voter registration form. And when she signed her name at the bottom of that, she looked up and she asked the canvassers to pray that God would allow her to live long enough to be able to cast a ballot. Here's a woman that was given 6 months to live, and her dying wishes was not to go to an exotic location or to meet a celebrity or to go to Disney World. Her dying wish was to be able to experience what it felt like to be a complete citizen, to be able to vote. Right, and that experience that I experienced in my first presidential election, 04, the first time in over 30 years when I voted in the primary, that was a feeling that allowed me to understand that the right to vote and the act of voting was sacred, and it transcended partisan politics. It transcended implicit racial biases, and it took us to a place that basically said something so simple yet powerful. It says that I am. Right, it validates our existence as a human being, that our voice matters, right? That we matter, right? And so when you look at that and understand that there's so many people that's getting the opportunity. I know Anika dad, when he walked in and he voted for the first time, that was something that was so spiritual and transformational, and we dare not minimize that by narrowing it down to how it impacts elections.
Yeah.
Right. How do we, and sadly, this woman, her health took a turn for the worse, and she ended up passing away before ever getting the opportunity to vote. And that just ripped my heart apart. But I know that we can, as a country, we can connect with these stories and understand that every American citizen should be able to experience that, should be able to engage in such a sacred of act that blood was spilled for, right? On so many sides, that we have an opportunity to engage in that, right? And the more of us engage in it, the more vibrant our democracy is, and that's great for everyone.
That's right. That's right. You know, we need to remember that the right to vote is a right. It is not a privilege. It is not a privilege. It is the right that everyone should have. And so I just love how you keep bringing this back to the humanity of it, right? It is really about people and people power, and a sense of pride, a sense of belonging, a sense of being connected, right? A sense that, right, I'm visible. You see me, my voice matter. I just love that. I'm going to move on to this question because it may be the last question if you all answer this. Do you believe that change is possible? We lost Representative John Lewis this year, but we see people like Stacey Abrams taking up the torch. Are we headed in the right direction? I know what you're gonna say, Desmond.
Hey,
Well, Desmond already got us all fired up and everything. I can't wait to read the book, to be honest. I can't wait to read his book. But yes, absolutely. Like it is possible. There is not a choice of whether there's going to be hope, because hope is the only way we're going to keep putting one foot in front of the other, right? And I think really just the mental change needs to happen, right? The narrative change needs to happen. The charging folks to get to a place to where they are in hope, right? They're living that out. And I just think about, just to even your earlier point around the question of, the impact. I think with Restore the Vote, what we're going to see is an impact in not only the elections, but we're going to see impact with how people engage with folks registering them to vote, right? So where we're going to be, it's not oh no, I'm going to be stigmatized and I'm alienated, get that ballot away from me. No, it's going to be an embrace of clarity around, like, I am part of this democracy and there is no shackles that's taking me or bonding me away, right, from me activating my voice. We're going to see voter suppression no longer existing in the courtrooms. And I think also there needs to be more folks who's actually sitting inside of our courtrooms and looking at the faces of our judges who have to tell folks, be law-abiding a citizen, and also part of your condition is not voting. And the confusion that goes on in a person's brain, right? When they're told, be active and be positive and don't commit a crime, but yeah, you're out of the voting box. So we're going to see liberation even in that, to where, like, if you are finding yourself into a situation in the courtroom, that that the folks who are the justice leaders are actually want you to do good. They want you to not recommit a crime. They want you to be a law-abiding citizen. That the intention is actually good, right? And I think that is where hope comes in. Hope comes in when you know that someone actually have your best intention. Someone actually cares about your future. Someone wants to see you thrive, right? And that is extremely hard in a time where we have the history of someone actually enslaving your body, right? That is extremely hard. So I also want to be very clear with doing this work, being an activist, being a freedom fighter, you are actively exposing yourself, right? You're actively exposing yourself to making that change, and it's going to be extremely hard. Also, too, that love piece has to come in. And I think these conversations are happening at our dinner tables. These conversations need to happen in our congregations. These conversations of hope for expanding our democracy has to happen in ways that's not only into the political calculus, but it's into what Desmond was sharing, our communities being more embracive, right? And that narrative change and getting access to the ballot will change a lot of other things that we'll see. We'll start actually caring about each other more because we'll see each other valuable enough to actually make change. When you have someone who is politically positioned to be weakened and to not have a voice, then you see a lot of collateral consequences with crime. You see a lot of collateral consequences with violence, a lot of collateral consequences with just really horrible decisions, right? Because they weren't even giving access to make a decision. So let's expand people's opportunities to make more decisions for their life. And I think with, in the ballot box, or even showing up within their civic engagement, is a very positive step into the direction for a safer democracy and a more loving democracy as well.
Wow. So you already know I'm at this position, but I do want to add, right? Because I love my sister, Stacy. She actually have an description on my book that you can get, Anika. But here's the deal. I think that one of the reasons why there's hope, right, is because when you look over the last 2 years, some of the greatest victories around voting rights, you have Amendment 4 passing, right? You have a legal case, a legal challenge in North Carolina, and you have Prop 17 that just passed in California, which allowed people on parole to be able to vote, right? And then you had the unanimous jury amendment victory in Louisiana. All of those major victories were led by people who were formerly incarcerated, right? When you have people who are on the ground doing that work, listen, I am more excited about what Anika's gonna do than what Stacy's gonna do right now, because Anika is down in the gutter, right? Keeping it real and dealing with, because here's the deal. These are the people that's been neglected by the upper echelon that's going to be the key in turning all of this thing around, right? And so people who are directly impacted are much greater, have a much greater level of authenticity, that their engagement is going to be so impactful. And we're seeing it play out with these major victories across the country. People like Dorsey Nunn, Darrell Atkinson, Norris Henderson, Susan Burton. These are leaders who have been through the system and have been through hell and has emerged from that as God has prepared them to do great things, right? And so those people and more people who I haven't even met yet in Philly and in Georgia and in Alabama, who are rising up, and we find and identify these people in Minnesota and push a lot of resources their way and help uplift them, and they're going to carry us over the top. I am so confident of that, because that's what Jesus do. When you look at the Bible, Jesus always take the least among a group of people to bring about the biggest change. So when you're ready to rock this, find you somebody directly impacted. That's the winning formula.
Amen to that. Craig, we have a few minutes. You have anything you want to add to that? I feel like I'm in between asking Craig to respond to that and responding to a question that I see posted here.
Yeah, I mean, just real briefly, I think the story in Florida is just, spectacular to me as an outsider, because Florida politics have always been very conservative in terms of the electoral politics. But, when it came to actually putting the enfranchisement to the people, it passed overwhelmingly with a supermajority. So you have to look at that and take a lot of hope. On the other hand, I guess I have a fair amount of cynicism about where we're at. And I'll just put it this way. We do not have a consensus on the importance of universal political participation in our system. There are forces that are continuing to try to marginalize and disenfranchise and restrict access to the ballot box. And this is just going to be a fight that, for the rest of my adult life, we'll have to be engaged in with constant vigilance. It's not going away. I mean, the reality is our democracy is about 50 years old in terms of universal participation. And we're not at the point yet where there's broad consensus that we want everybody to be casting ballots. And until we get there, it's going to be an ongoing struggle.
Yes. So it is 9:29, and I think our session ends at 10:30. And I am feeling really guilty about not getting to any of there was a couple of questions that were posted in the chat. And so to also respect the process that is in place, we're going to have to end this. And I feel like this has gone just way too fast, way too quick. You guys are doing some awesome work. Florida, I am impressed, Desmond, with the work, the work of the people in Florida, you know, to raise 27 million in 2 days to help the people in that process. It's just awesome work. So with that, I just want to say, I just want to have you guys to feel free to remind people that the work that the Minnesota Justice Research Center is awesome work. You know, we also need the research to back up some of the work that has been done on the ground. So I'm just asking people to go to MNJRC.org. And if you feel so compelled to make a donation to support their important work. The mission of the Minnesota Justice Research Center is to transform the justice system. They are a nonpartisan entity, and they focus, again, is all about research, education, and policy. And so I want to thank Justin Tyrell for the invitation to come in to moderate and to hear and listen to you guys speak and share the work, the powerful work that you're doing. You know, at the end of the day, as a state representative who believes that in order to, we need both, we need people movement, but we also need people in the legislature and other places of power to move the policy, change the policies that are disproportionately impacting people. And so let's remember that we all have a role to play. All the roles are important. You know, each one, teach one, just do that. And so that we can create the world that we need, that we can change and make sure that every person vote matter, and to realize that voting is a right. It is not a privilege that has been turned around and upside down in so many of our states. Let's stay in this race and let's do our part. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rena. Thank you, Representative Rena. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Please notice that there's links in the chat for the next breakout sessions. And I just want to say thank you. That was a great panel, Rena, Desmond, Anika, Craig. Blessings to all of you.